So once again, taking the trip into the mind of the English travelers and seeing some of these hallucinations that they're having. And more specifically in this video, we're going to talk about how one traveler is tying the biblical curse of Ham and his descendants to what they imagine to be black skin, right? And so we're going to see this connection in this video. And so going in this, we're going back into this article called Before Othello, Elizabethan Representations of Sub-Saharan Africans. And this is by Dr. Alden Vaughan and Dr. Virginia Vaughan. And so we're going to open up this article right now and see if we can get some understanding.
The 1554 to 1555 voyage was significant for its primacy among English descriptions of Guinea, and more important in hindsight for bringing back to England certain black slaves. As merchants intent on exploiting the stores of ivory, metals, and spices of the African continent, the Englishmen's principal interest in kidnapped Africans lay not in obtaining servants for use back home, but in training guides and interpreters for forthcoming expeditions.
So we can see that the original intent in this particular circumstance was to bring people who have brown skin, who they're calling black Africans, to bring them back to England, not for the use of the English to be servants in that land, but more specifically to train them and create agents out of these people to go back into the land of Africa for use of later expeditions. So in other words, these people are thinking long term, right? They may be ignorant of the skin color of the people, but one thing that these English people are not ignorant of is how to take people, reprogram their minds, and create agents out of them so they can go and help do the work of going in, colonizing, or settling on the land, whatever it is that they're trying to do. In this case, taking the ivory, taking the metals and the spices that they're hearing about in that continent. Now watch what happens next.
Several, perhaps all, of the 5 or so African captives eventually returned with English voyages and fulfilled appreciably their captors' commercial purposes. Narratives of those voyages refer to the guides as our Negroes.
So once these captured Africans had been brought back to Africa with this new mind that they have received, now they're agents, they helped fulfill the commercial purposes of the English, right? You're taking people and you're putting in a new mindset in these people where they see the world different, and you can use them on your behalf, which is what the English are doing. Notice that they call them our Negroes, right? In a sense, they own them.
Gainch, in any event, provided his countrymen with the first recorded instance of English enslavement of Africans, even if the long-run intention was to return them to their homelands.
So Robert Gainch was one we had discussed in another video. He's the one talking about the headless men over there in Africa, the anthropophagi, the man-eating, flesh-eating people that are in Africa. He's the one providing these accounts as well.
Whatever Eden and Willis's readers may have thought about the morality or practicality of enslaving Africans in England, they learned on the final page of the History of Travel section of English Voyages to Guinea that some Europeans were already making extensive use of forced black labor. On the island of St. Thomas, off the Central African coast, Portuguese plantation owners brought captives from the African mainland to raise and process sugar. Some plantations employed 150 or 200 and some 300 black slaves of men and women to till the ground and do other laborious works. Knowledgeable Englishmen and women must have known, too, that the Portuguese and Spanish had already transported thousands of Africans to America to replace the rapidly diminishing supply of indigenous laborers.
So we can see here how some of these ideas of the African laborer is starting to brew. You have these travelers who are bringing back these wild, fanciful tales and bringing them back to England, and the elite are gobbling this stuff up. And also you have people bringing reports back showing how other Europeans are using these Africans as enslaved people already, right? So this is starting to become a recipe for disaster for many of the African people.
With Eden and Willis's book, the notion of enslavement as a customary European condition for Africans gained important additional publicity and reinforced the growing connection between color and bondage.
So what is the Eden and Willis book? You have to remember that we talked about it in other videos. Richard Eden and we have Richard Willis, who are creating these compilations of other literature of people who are traveling in Africa and making these compilations of what they supposedly have seen. And these are exaggerated accounts where they're coming up with stuff about people that never existed and events that never happened. Right? And so these are things that are being compiled into these books. And so some of the instances, what they're recording is that they're saying that there's people over there with black skin. They're also recording that there are people over there that have no laws, no customs. They have no religion. They just live like wild animals and wild beasts. There's supposed to be Ethiopians over there who have one large foot and who can move so fast. These are the accounts that they're coming up with in these narratives and passing around these travelers' tales to the English, and the English are gobbling this stuff up like pumpkin pie. And so these travelers' tales are being spread around, and like I said, the English are beginning to believe this stuff as true. So, and what's happening is that they're linking these wild stories together with the color of the people and the bondage. And they're creating these linkages with these ideas and concepts. This color is supposed to be in bondage. This is how it's being linked together and hardening and being concreted from the imaginative world into the physical world. Right? That's how this is happening. Let's continue going.
A year after the Eden Willis anthology gave English readers their first prominent account of Africa through their compatriots' eyes, George Best's true discourse of the late voyages of discovery raised the pejorative quotient to a new level.
Sir John Mandeville, we have Richard Eden, we have Richard Willis, we also have Robert Gainch, who all these are coming up with wild, fanciful accounts. Now we're introducing George Best. We're going to see what type of wild imagination he contributes to the topic and discussion, because he's supposed to raise the negativity to another level. So let's continue going and find out what he does.
Best, whose first-hand account of Martin Frobisher's 3 attempts in the 1570s to find a northwest passage to the East Indies was an important document of early North American exploration, embellished his true discourse with a gratuitous geographical description of the world. Among the benefits to be gained from a diligent reading of this discourse, his preface declared, was how to proceed and deal with strange people, be they never so barbarous, cruel, and fierce. Best had in mind the inhabitants of northern North America, with whom he had already clashed, but his early pages exude contempt for the strange people of Africa, whom he scarcely knew. Like Mandeville and others before him, Best was fascinated by the African's black skin, but unlike many commentators, he rejected the climatological explanation.
Like Sir John Mandeville and all the others that came before him, George Best is also fascinated by his own imagining of seeing brown-skinned people as having black skin. And he's rejecting the climatological explanation of this particular skin color, and which is saying basically that the people have these certain pigmentations because of the climate that they live in. Let's find out what else George Best has to say.
The people of Africa, especially the Ethiopians, are so coal-black, and their hair, like wool, curled short, which blackness and curled hair they suppose to come only by the parching heat of the sun. Best supposed differently.
So right now, Best is making this claim that the people of there are so coal-black. Now, here's an example right here, or an image, of an Ethiopian who has very rich skin. Here is the color so coal-black. You can see that there's a clear difference between rich brown skin and coal black, which Best is trying to describe and imagining and hallucinating from his own account and desiring so badly to be true. And like what was already mentioned, George Best does not accept the explanation that this color comes from the climate. He has a different explanation. Let's go ahead and continue finding out what his explanation is.
Climate cannot cause indelible blackness, he insisted, for even under the equinoctial in America and in the East Indies and in the islands Molucca, the people are not black, but white, with long hair uncurled as we have. He adduced further evidence from England, where an Ethiopian brought into its cold climate produced a black son, even though its mother was a fair English woman.
Here goes George Best again. Can't stop hallucinating. Now he's saying that there's a fair-skinned woman with this rich-skinned person, and now they're producing this black son. Here we go again with this stuff, right? Coming up with this madness. George Best is best at his madness. Let's continue going because it gets spicy in here.
Best's alternative explanation for African skin color revealed his blatant chromatic bias. Their blackness proceedeth of some natural infection of the first inhabitants of that country, and so all the whole progeny of them descended are still polluted with the same blot of infection.
So the authors are describing George Best as having this blatant color bias. But once again, this blackness that he's describing is only in his imagination, right? It's not something that he's actually seeing. And he's describing what he's seeing as these people have some natural infection and that the descendants of these people must have been polluted with this curse, right? And they're carrying it on, basically. And we have to understand that these, along with other similar type of concepts that they're trying to attach and label as black skin, these have profound effects which people are still feeling all the way up until today, right? From these type of fanciful accounts and concepts that these English travelers are imagining and concluding in their own hallucinations, right? This is what we're left with today.
From his examination of Holy Writ from the cause of the original infection, Best offered an unusual exegesis of Genesis, chapters 9-10.
Let's get George Best's breakdown of Genesis chapter 9 and Genesis chapter 10. Here we go.
When Noah and his family were in the ark, Best hypothesized, his son Ham, disobeying his father's prescription on sex, used company with his wife to disinherit the offspring of his other two brethren by producing the first heir in the post-diluvian world. For this contempt of authority, God decreed that Ham's son Cush and all his posterity should be so black and loathsome that it might remain a spectacle of disobedience to all the world.
So what did George Best do? He did what all other people in religions do. Make up their own doctrines, create their own narratives that fit whatever they see is correct in their own eyes, and then say that it came from God. So I really can't even be mad at him for doing this because this is just what comes with the territory of religion. It's based primarily on people's opinions and how they perceive what the scriptures are supposed to be saying and the narrative that they want to present and use to justify whatever objective it is that they have, right? And so this is the way George Best is seeing it. He's seeing it as, hey, there's a curse on Ham and his son Cush. Therefore, I'm going to attribute that to these people over here who we're calling black people. That's what he's doing. Right? And we used to do the same thing when I was in the Israelites. With the two characters, Jacob and Esau. Make Esau as the white man, right? And that's the person that him and his descendants are the one that God in the Bible hates, right? And they're supposed to be destroyed. So we did the same thing. And you can understand that this is the same characteristic and trait, human trait that's just creeping its way on into other humans and other populations. Right? Where you do the same thing that they're doing back then, you can see it happening today. Right? It's all the same stuff. Right? It just manifests itself in a different way. Right? And it may not use a so-called black character. It may use a white character. Right? It's just all the same stuff though. Right? And so I realized I was doing the same thing that George Best is doing right here. And so I had to stop hallucinating and I had to stop sleepwalking. And then I had to resurrect from the dead and see things in a new life. Right? And so let's see what else Best has to say.
In Best's explanation, the Ethiopian's blackness was not just a curious epidermal phenomenon, as it had been to many earlier commentators, but a spectacle.
Well, now the authors are getting ready to explain what this spectacle is. Here we go.
In his era, spectacle connoted a person or thing exhibited to or set before the public gaze as an object, either A, of curiosity or contempt, or B, of marvel or admiration. Oxford English Dictionary. To the English eye, a black African provoked a curiosity at the very least, and often marvel. Rarely, if ever, did the sight inspire admiration.
To whose eye? It says to the English eye. That imagined black skin is what was provoking the curiosity, right? To the African eye, that skin color didn't have anything to do with anything, right? It didn't have any meaning to it. But the English eye, who came and imposed the meanings on the skin color, meanings that were previously not there, to the English eye, it provoked curiosity, right? Understand how this works. It wasn't until later afterwards when the Africans and other people with similar types of skin color begin to accept those beliefs and see it through the English eye, then you get the product of self-hate and self-destruction, right? Which we still see till this very day, right? Stemming from the English eye, the way that they perceive the reality in their own imagination, placing it upon other people, and then other people believing in those ideas. And so in the English eye, that skin color rarely, if ever, produced any type of admiration. Think about that. So when you look at it from the English eyes, that's what you're going to see.
To the English eye, a black African provoked a curiosity at the very least, and often marvel. Rarely, if ever, did the sight inspire admiration. Judging from the writings of George Best and all his contemporaries whose ruminations survive, contempt was the prevailing response. Black pigmentation, moreover, invoked in readers of Best's true discourse and many later glosses on Genesis the moral lesson that disobedience to the Father's law leads, righteously and inevitably, to an everlasting indelible curse.
So this idea of a black pigmentation invoked, or it gave rise to, in the readers of these literatures, a moral lesson that if they did not follow what this Father God said, then as a righteous result, there would be an indelible or an unchangeable or unremovable curse, which we understand to be this imagined black skin, right? And so these type of accounts, as ridiculous as they are, these have to be dealt with from this type of lens, because you have to get to a point where when you look at this stuff and you look at these accounts and you read some of this nonsense that's in here, it has to be to a point where when you see it, that it does not stir up any type of emotional responses of anger, of feeling upset, frustration. You can't have those type of emotions when you're dealing with this stuff. Right? You have to completely detach yourself from these ideas that were created in the minds of these people who are living at this time, right? They're living in an age of ignorance. They don't really know that much, right? This is just the way that they perceive the world at this time, right? And then they're perceiving it this way and they're using it to their benefit, right? This is their cultural context and they're creating from that cultural context, right? And so when you accept these ideas today, these ideas of black and these ideas of black skin, and you continue to reinforce these concepts and these ideas and these types of affirmations about oneself, all these ideas that we're reading about, they're all lumped into the collective unconsciousness of everyone, right? This is still very part of the reality that we live in. It's not as apparent, but it's still there, right? And these ideas are sensitive to many people. It's because they have themselves attached to these ideas, right? And that's why I say you have to remove yourself from these, right? That's going into the final phase of freedom, where it's a psychological freedom, right? And the important part to realize about it is that no one can do this part for you, right? This is an individual effort. When individuals come together and they're working on this same type of mission, then you can get a collective. But you have to understand as well that there's other people who are not ready for that type of work, right? And they're not ready for that type of freedom, right? And so they see themselves still as these ideas which were created by the English, right? And then reinforced throughout with the racial hierarchy, slavery, the Jim Crow, and all the way up until today, and then still reinforced even within that community, right? Keeping these ideas floating, keeping these concepts going together, attaching people with this blackness idea, right? All this stuff is still very much alive, right? And so we have to look at this stuff, find out where it's coming from, and then deal with it, okay? So I want to thank you for watching the video. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you on the next one.